The Winchester lay on the table like a confession, waiting to be heard. 40 inches of blued steel and walnut stock, the metal dulled by 6 years of Texas dust, but still holding the faint scent of gun oil and something darker. Something that smelled like memory. The morning light came through the window in thin gold bars painting shadows across the weathered wood grain, and Clara Monroe stood over the rifle with her hand suspended in the air above it, fingers trembling like grass before a storm. She was 37 years old, but looked 50. The Texas Panhandle did that to women. The wind carved lines around their eyes, and the sun baked the softness from their hands, and the years of watching the horizon for rain that never came put a permanent squint in their gaze. Clara's hair had gone gray at the temples, though it had been black as crude oil on her wedding day. Her shoulders carried a permanent stoop from carrying water buckets and fence wire and the weight of being alone. But her eyes were still sharp, still the color of creek water in winter, still capable of seeing what needed to be seen. She picked up the Winchester. The wood was warm from the sunlight. Her fingers found the familiar grooves near the trigger guard where Thomas had carved his initials 12 years ago when they were still young enough to believe in permanence. TM's simple letters cut deep. She wondered if he knew even then that nothing lasted, that men died and left their widows to finish what they started. The ranch yard spread out beyond the window in shades of brown and rust. 400 head of Texas longhorns milled in the holding pens, their hides patched with color like old quilts, their horns catching the early light. 6 years ago there had been 800, but drought and debt and the slow grinding machinery of survival had whittled the herd down to this. 400 head, just enough to save the ranch, or lose everything trying. 2 men stood by the corral fence. The younger one was Sam Riggins, 21 years old and built like a willow switch, all height and no weight, with hair the color of dried tobacco and eyes that never stopped moving. The older one was Pike Carroll, 38, but looking older, his face weathered like boot leather left too long in the sun, a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, like someone had tried to draw a line and given up halfway. They were talking in low voices, their words lost to distance, but Clara could read the shape of the conversation in their posture. Sam uncertain, Pike patient, both of them waiting for her to make the decision they all knew was coming. Clara shifted the rifle to her shoulder. The weight settled there with the ease of long familiarity. Thomas had taught her to shoot when they were still courting back when she was 19, and he was 28, and the world seemed smaller and more manageable. He would stand behind her with his hands over hers, guiding the barrel toward the target, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered corrections. Breathe out slow, squeeze, don't pull, let the rifle do the work. She had loved him then with the kind of love that doesn't ask questions, the kind that believes what it's told. She walked to the door. The floorboards creaked under her boots. Each board had its own voice. She knew them all. The high whine near the kitchen, the deep groan by the bedroom, the soft sigh at the threshold where she stood now, one hand on the frame looking out at the men who waited, and the cattle that represented her last chance, and the long empty miles that stretched north toward Kansas like a road made of dust and doubt. Pike saw her first. He straightened and touched the brim of his hat. Sam turned and his face went careful the way young faces do when they're trying not to show fear. Clara stepped out onto the porch. The board sighed. The morning air was cool, but it carried the promise of heat. September in Texas meant days that burned and nights that froze and wind that never stopped reminding you how small you were. Pike walked toward her with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had learned not to hurry. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her with eyes the color of stone. "You sure about this, Mrs. Monroe?" His voice was rough from years of trail dust and tobacco. "That's a long way north for a woman alone." Clara didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the horizon where the sky met the earth in a hard, clean line. "I'm not alone." Her voice came out steady. "I've got 400 head and the one promise to keep." Pike was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing they were all thinking. Promise to who? Clara turned her head slowly. The rifle shifted on her shoulder. She met Pike's eyes and held them. "To the man whose death I carry." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Pike's face went still. Sam took a step back. The cattle lowed softly from the pens, and somewhere far off a crow called once and went silent. Clara watched Pike's throat work as he swallowed. Watched the flicker of something cross his face. Not shock. Something closer to recognition. She turned and walked back into the house before either of them could speak. The truth was a stone she had carried for 6 years, and now she had set it down in the space between them, and there was no taking it back. 6 years ago the night had been thick with rain. The kind of rain that came down in sheets and turned the yard to mud and made the roof drum like 1,000 fingers tapping. Clara had stood in the kitchen watching Thomas pack his saddlebags by lamplight. His hands moved with quick efficiency, rolling shirts and checking ammunition and cinching straps with the ease of someone who had done this before. She didn't know then that he had. That there were parts of Thomas Monroe's life that predated her and would outlast her, and had nothing to do with the man she thought she married. "Don't go," she had said it quietly. "Please, whatever this is about." Thomas didn't look up. His jaw was set in that way it got when his mind was made up, and arguing would only make him dig in harder. "I have to." His voice was flat. If I don't, they'll come here. For you. Then let me come with you. He had looked up then. His eyes were dark, and there was something in them she didn't recognize. Something that looked like fear. No, you stay. Keep the ranch. If I don't come back, there's a rifle under the bed. And a map in the barrel. Find it. Go north. You'll understand. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand he explain. But Thomas was already moving toward the door, saddlebags over his shoulder hat pulled low. He paused at the threshold and turned back. For a moment she thought he would say something, would give her the truth she could feel hovering just beyond reach, but he only looked at her with those dark, frightened eyes, and then he was gone into the rain and the night swallowed him whole. 3 days later the sheriff brought him back, not Thomas, just his body wrapped in canvas and tied across the back of a horse. They said it was a hunting accident, said a bear had gotten him up in the hills, but Clara had unwrapped the canvas when they left, had looked at the wounds. They weren't claw marks, they were bullet holes, 2 of them, clean and deliberate, one in the back, one in the head. She had stood there in the barn with Thomas's blood on her hands and known with absolute certainty that someone had murdered her husband, and she had known with equal certainty that she would never stop until she found out who. The map had been exactly where Thomas said it would be, rolled tight and stuffed down the barrel of the Winchester rifle he kept under the bed. She had found it a week after the funeral when the house was finally empty and the casseroles the neighbors brought had all gone cold, and she was alone with the silence that filled the spaces Thomas used to occupy. The map was hand-drawn on a piece of oilcloth, simple lines marking rivers and downs and the long trail that ran north from Texas through Oklahoma and into Kansas. And there, marked with a small precise X in ink that had faded to brown, was a spot on a hillside just outside Dodge City. Next to the X in Thomas's careful script were 7 words that changed everything. Where I buried him. Bring him home. Clara had stared at those words until they blurred, had read them again and again trying to make them mean something other than what they clearly meant. But there was no other interpretation. Thomas had killed someone, had buried the body in Kansas. And now he wanted her to dig it up and bring it back. She had spent 6 years trying to understand. 6 years living with the question of who. Who had Thomas killed? Who was buried on that hillside? Who did he think deserved to come home? The answer came the day Ira Baker knocked on her door. Ira was 52 years old and ran the bank in town with the kind of quiet competence that made people trust him with their money and their secrets. He wore a good coat and kept his boots polished, and when he took off his hat his hair was still thick and dark despite his age. He stood on Clara's porch holding a leather folder and looking at her with eyes that held something close to pity. Mrs. Monroe. His voice was gentle. I'm sorry to come unannounced. Clara had known immediately this wasn't a social call. She stepped back and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table where 6 years ago she had watched Thomas pack his saddlebags and the lamplight fell across Ira's face in a way that made him look older. Your husband borrowed money from the bank. Ira opened the folder and pulled out a piece of paper. 6 years ago. $4,000. He said it was for insurance. Insurance against what Ira didn't answer. He just slid the paper across the table. Clara looked at the numbers. 4,000 principal. 6 years of interest. The total at the bottom made her stomach drop. $7,200. Ira's voice was quiet. Due in 60 days. I don't have that kind of money. Clara heard herself say it and was surprised by how calm she sounded. Everything I have is in the herd. I know. Ira pulled out another piece of paper. That's why I brought this. It was a purchase order, signed and dated 6 years ago. A cattle buyer in Dodge City named William Marsh. 400 head of Texas Longhorns at $18 a head. The total came to exactly $7,200. Thomas arranged this before he died. Ira watched her face. Prepaid the buyer. The man's still waiting. All you have to do is get the cattle there. Clara stared at the paper. The letters swam. She thought about Thomas packing in the rain, about the map in the rifle barrel, about the X on the hillside and the 7 words written in his hand. He knew. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He knew he was going to die. Ira was quiet for a long time. Then he said yes, and he knew you'd have to finish what he started. After Ira left, Clara went down to the cellar. She moved the old trunk that sat against the wall and pulled up the loose board beneath it. The Winchester was there, wrapped in oilcloth, just as she had left it 6 years ago. She unwrapped it slowly. The metal was cold, the wood smooth. She opened the chamber and checked the barrel. The map was still there. She pulled it out and unrolled it on the floor. The X was still visible. The words still clear, but now she noticed something else. Something she had missed before. There was a second mark on the map, smaller, fainter, a tiny notation near the edge that she had thought was just a smudge. She held the map up to the light from the cellar window. The notation resolved into letters. 2 words in pencil so faint they were almost invisible. For Sam. Clara's hands started to shake. She lowered the map, stared at the words, read them again to make sure she wasn't imagining them. For Sam. The truth hit her like cold water. Thomas hadn't just hidden a body in Kansas. He had hidden something else. Something meant for Sam Riggins, the boy who worked the neighboring ranch. The boy with Thomas's eyes and Thomas's hands and Thomas's way of standing with his weight on one hip like he was always ready to move. The boy who didn't know his father. The memory came back sharp and sudden. 7 years ago, before Thomas died. He had come home late one night smelling of whiskey and smoke and sat at the same kitchen table with his head in his hands. I did something, Clara. Something I can't take back. She had sat with him, waited. Eventually he told her, "There's a boy." His mother died giving birth. She never told me she was carrying him. By the time I found out he was 2 years old and living with her sister, I tried to bring him here. His aunt wouldn't let me. Said I'd already done enough damage. What's his name? Samuel. But they call him Sam. Thomas had looked at her then with eyes full of something that might have been shame or might have been fear. I want to tell him. When he's old enough, I want him to know. But Thomas had died before Sam was old enough, and Clara had kept the secret because she thought that was what Thomas would have wanted. Had watched Sam grow up at the neighboring ranch, tall and lean and quick to smile, not knowing his father had died less than 5 miles away. Not knowing that Clara Monroe, who nodded to him in town and sometimes bought eggs from his aunt, was the closest thing to a stepmother he would ever have. And now Thomas had left something for him. At the grave of a man Clara didn't know, on a hillside in Kansas 700 miles away. She rolled the map back up and slid it into the rifle barrel. Then she wrapped the rifle and climbed out of the cellar and went to find Sam Riggins. She found him 2 days later working fence line at the neighboring ranch. He was stripped to the waist in the afternoon heat, his skin brown from the sun sweat running down his back as he stretched wire between posts. He looked up when he heard her horse, and straightened, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Mrs. Monroe?" His voice was respectful. "Something I can do for you." Clara sat her horse and looked at him. Really looked. She saw Thomas in the line of his jaw, in the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he squinted against the sun, in the shape of his hands as he wiped them on his jeans. "I need a hand." Her voice was steady. "I'm driving 400 head north to Kansas. Need someone who knows cattle. Pay is $50. Sam blinked. "That's twice the going rate. It's dangerous. And long. 3 weeks minimum, maybe more." Sam studied her. His eyes were sharp despite his youth. "What makes it dangerous? The trail. The weather. The men we might meet along the way." Clara paused. "And the reason we're going. Which is," Clara looked past him at the horizon. The sun was starting its long slide toward evening and the shadows were growing longer. "To bring someone home." Sam was quiet. Then he said who Clara brought her eyes back to his face. She wondered if he could see what she saw, if somewhere in the back of his mind he recognized the shape of his own features in hers, the legacy of blood and bone that connected them whether he knew it or not. Someone who deserves better than he got. She gathered her reins. "You in or out?" Sam looked at the fence line, at the wire he'd been stretching, at the miles of empty land that stretched in every direction. Then he looked back at Clara. "When do we leave? 3 days. I'll be there." Clara turned her horse and rode away before he could ask more questions. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Sam standing in the dust watching her go, with a look on his face like a man who had just glimpsed the edge of something vast and unknowable and was trying to decide whether to step toward it or run. Finding Pike Carroll was harder. Clara knew he existed. Had heard Thomas mention the name once or twice in the year before he died, always in passing, always with a certain careful tone that suggested Pike was someone important but not someone to be discussed. After Thomas died, Clara had asked around. The name Pike Carroll brought strange reactions. Some people claimed not to know him, others changed the subject. One old-timer at the feed store had leaned close and said in a whisper that Pike Carroll was a ghost and ghosts were best left alone, but Clara found him anyway. It took her 2 days of writing and asking questions and following threads of rumor until finally someone told her about a man matching Pike's description who drank alone at a saloon in San Antonio. She rode there on the 3rd day and tied her horse outside and pushed through the doors into the dim, smoky interior. Pike was at a corner table with his back to the wall. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, and his hat was pulled low, and there was a whiskey glass in front of him that he hadn't touched. Clara walked across the room. Her boots were loud on the wooden floor. Every head turned to watch her. A woman alone in a saloon was rare. A woman alone in a saloon looking like she had business was rarer still. She stopped at Pike's table. He looked up. His eyes were gray and flat and held no surprise. "I need someone who knows the trail." Her voice carried in the quiet. "And who knows how to keep quiet?" Pike studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're Clara Monroe." It wasn't a question. Clara felt something cold move through her chest. "You knew my husband." Pike's jaw tightened. "I knew what he did." The saloon had gone completely silent. Clara could feel the weight of listening ears all around them. She pulled out the chair across from Pike and sat down. "Then you know why I have to go north." Pike's eyes didn't leave her face. "To bring Jessie home." The name hit Clara like a fist. Jessie. She hadn't known. Thomas had never said the name. Had only written those 7 words on a map and left her to figure out the rest. But now she knew. Jessie. The man Thomas had killed. The man buried on a Kansas hillside. The brother he had murdered and tried to hide. How do you know? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Pike picked up his whiskey glass, turned it in his fingers, set it down without drinking. "'Cause I was there. I saw Thomas shoot him. I saw him bury the body. And I've been running from Jesse's men ever since." Clara's hands clenched on the table. "Why would you help me?" Pike finally looked away, looked down at the whiskey glass and the amber liquid inside it. "Because your husband saved my life that night. He could have shot me too. He didn't. So I owe him. And I owe you the truth. You the poet." What truth? Pike's eyes came back to hers. They were hard and gray and full of old pain. That Jesse Monroe was a killer. That he was coming for you and Sam. That Thomas did the only thing he could do to protect you both. And that 3 days later Jesse's men found Thomas and made him pay for it. Clara felt the world tilt. She gripped the edge of the table. "Sam. You know about Sam." Pike nodded slowly. "Thomas told me. The night he killed Jesse. Said his brother found out about the boy. Threatened to tell everyone. To ruin your life, to take Sam away. Thomas couldn't let that happen. So he shot him, yes. And then he rode home to you, and 3 days later they found him, tortured him, killed him, made it look like an accident." Clara's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She had cried all her tears 6 years ago. Now there was only the hard, cold core of what needed to be done. "They'll come for us," she said. "When we go north, Jesse's men, they'll know." Pike nodded. "They're led by a man named Dixon Gray. He was Jesse's best friend. He's been looking for that grave for 6 years. When he finds out you're heading to Kansas, he'll follow." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going anyway." Pike's voice was flat. "With or without me. And I'd rather be there when Dixon finds you than hear about it after." Clara stood. The chair scraped. She looked down at Pike and saw in his scarred face the truth of what he was offering. Not protection, not help. Just witness. Someone who knew the whole story and would stand with her while it played out to whatever end was waiting. "We leave in 3 days." She turned to go. Pike's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Monroe." She looked back. "Thomas was a good man who made a hard choice. Don't let anyone tell you different." Clara walked out of the saloon into the bright afternoon sun. She untied her horse and rode back toward the ranch and tried not to think about the fact that she was leading Sam Riggins toward the truth about his father, and that truth was buried in a grave she was going to dig up with her own hands. The 3 days passed like water through a sieve. Clara gathered supplies, checked the herd, went over the route 100 times. The nights were the hardest. She would lie awake in the bed she had shared with Thomas and stare at the ceiling and wonder if she was doing the right thing. If bringing Jesse's body back was really what Thomas wanted, or if she had misunderstood the map and the message and the whole impossible task he had left her. On the morning they were supposed to leave, Clara woke before dawn. She dressed in the dark and went out to the corral where the cattle were already stirring. Sam and Pike were there waiting. Sam looked young and nervous. Pike looked old and tired. Clara looked at them both and wondered which one would break first, wondered if it would be her. "You boys ready?" Sam nodded. Pike said nothing. Clara swung into the saddle and touched her spurs to her horse's flanks, and the animal moved forward. Behind her the cattle began to shift, and slowly, reluctantly, the herd began to move. 400 head, 700 miles, one body waiting at the end. They rode north into a sky that was just starting to lighten at the edges. The first day on the trail was quiet. They pushed the herd at a steady pace, not too fast, letting the cattle find their rhythm. Sam rode the left flank, Pike rode the right. Clara took point. The land rolled past in shades of brown and gray. Mesquite and scrub oak, dry creek beds and rocky soil, the kind of country that looked empty but never was. That held snakes in the shadows and scorpions under every stone and the ghosts of all the men who had tried to cross it and failed. That night they made camp in a shallow draw that gave some shelter from the wind. Sam built the fire. Pike tended the horses. Clara sat apart from both of them with the Winchester across her lap and watched the darkness gather. The stars came out one by one, cold and distant. She thought about Thomas sitting by fires like this. Wondered if he had looked up at these same stars and felt the weight of what he had done. Wondered if he had been afraid. Sam came over and sat down near her. Not too close. Just close enough to talk. "You ever been married, Mrs. Monroe?" Clara looked at him. His face was young in the firelight, open, trusting. She thought about telling him the truth right then. Thought about saying yes. "I was married to your father, and he loved you even though he couldn't tell you, and now I'm taking you to his brother's grave so you can read the letter he left you." But the words stayed locked in her throat. "I was. For 12 years. Must have loved him a lot. To do this." Clara looked away. The fire crackled. Sparks rose into the darkness and died. "Love doesn't mean you know someone. I loved a man I thought was good. Turns out he was just good at hiding." Pike was listening from across the fire. She could feel his attention. Could feel him weighing her words. Sam was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My mother died when I was born. Never knew my father either. Sometimes I think if I could just know who he was, it would change something. Make me feel less alone." Clara's chest tightened. She looked at Sam's profile, saw Thomas there so clearly it hurt. Maybe he wanted you to know. Maybe he just ran out of time. Sam turned to look at her. His eyes were serious. You think people get second chances after they die? I think the living carry the dead with them. Clara kept her voice steady, whether they want to or not. Sam nodded slowly. He stood and went back to his bedroll. Clara watched him go, felt the weight of 6 years of silence pressing down on her chest like a stone. Later, when Sam was asleep, Pike came and sat where the boy had been. He doesn't know, Pike said quietly. No. You gonna tell him Clara was quiet for a long time? The fire had burned down to coals. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. When we get there. She looked at Pike. When we dig up Jesse, there's something buried with him. A letter. From Thomas to Sam. He'll know then. Pike absorbed this. Then he said, and if we don't make it there, if Dixon finds us first, then Sam never knows. And maybe that's better. Pike shook his head slowly. Nothing's better than the truth, Mrs. Monroe, even if it hurts. Clara looked at the Winchester in her lap, at the rifle that held the map that held the secret that held her future. She thought about how 6 years ago she had been a woman who believed what she was told, who trusted the man she married, who thought love was enough. She wasn't that woman anymore. The trail had already started to change her, and they were only 1 day in. She looked up at Pike, his scarred face, his gray eyes. You really saw it, Thomas, shooting Jesse. Yes, what did he say? After Pike's face went distant. He was quiet for so long. Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. He said, I just killed my brother. And then he said, now I have to bury him far enough away that Dixon never finds the body, because if Dixon finds it, he'll know. And if he knows, he'll come for Clara and Sam. And I can't let that happen. Clara's throat tightened. She blinked hard. And then what? Then Thomas looked at me and said, if anything happens to me, someone needs to tell Clara the truth. Someone needs to make sure she knows I didn't leave her by choice. Pike paused. He made me promise, so I'm keeping that promise now. Clara nodded. She couldn't speak. The stars wheeled overhead. The cattle breathed in the darkness. Somewhere far off a coyote called, and another answered, and then there was only silence. She stood, walked to the edge of the firelight, and looked north. Out there in the darkness was Kansas, and Jesse's grave, and the truth she was riding toward whether she was ready or not. She felt Pike watching her from the fire, felt the weight of his knowledge and Sam's innocence and Thomas's ghost pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow they would ride deeper into country she didn't know, would put more miles between themselves and safety, would move closer to the moment when everything would have to be revealed. The map, the body, the letter, the truth about who Sam really was and who Clara had been trying to protect him from all these years. She touched the rifle slung across her back, felt the cold metal, thought about the words carved into the stock. T.M. Thomas Monroe, a good man who killed his brother, a husband who left his widow a map to a grave, a father who loved his son from a distance and died before he could close it. She would bring Jesse home, would dig up the body and read whatever letter Thomas had left for Sam, would watch the boy's world break open when he learned the truth, and then she would have to live with what came after. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she was still Clara Monroe the widow, still the woman who kept secrets, still standing in the space between what was and what would be. She turned back to the fire. Pike had rolled into his blanket. Sam was already asleep. Clara sat down with the rifle across her lap and watched the coals fade and thought about the long miles ahead and whether she had enough strength left to walk them. The answer didn't come. The wind blew, the stars turned, and somewhere to the north, Dixon Gray was already riding. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like the world hadn't quite decided whether to wake up or go back to sleep. Clara stood at the edge of their camp, watching the eastern horizon bleed from black to charcoal to the color of old iron. 50 yards away, Dixon Gray and his 4 men were already breaking camp. They had kept their distance through the night, separate fires, separate watch rotations, but the division was more symbolic than real. They were all moving toward the same grave now, all carrying the same dead man north. The cattle were restless. She could hear them shifting in the pre-dawn darkness, hooves scraping dirt, low, anxious sounds rising from hundreds of throats. Animals knew things people didn't. Could sense weather changes and predators and danger moving toward them across empty miles. Clara wondered what the cattle sensed now, whether they could smell the tension thick as smoke between the 2 camps. Pike was already awake. She could see him moving between the horses, checking cinches and bits with the methodical care of a man who knew that small oversights got people killed. Sam still slept by the dying fire, his blanket pulled up to his chin, one hand curled near his face like a child. Clara looked at him and felt the familiar twist in her chest. The boy who didn't know he was looking at his father's widow, who had no idea that everything he thought he knew about himself was a carefully constructed lie. Dixon walked over as Clara finished saddling her mare. His boots crunched on the frost-hardened grass. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk far enough to maintain the careful distance they had established. We move together from here. His voice was flat, a statement, not a question. Clara kept her hand steady on the saddle cinch. You ride with us, not together. There's a difference. Dixon's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fair enough. He glanced at Sam's sleeping form. The boy know yet? About the letter? No. Claire's voice was quiet. He found the map last night. Knows something's buried for him. But he doesn't know what. Dixon absorbed this. Then he said, when he reads it, everything changes. You ready for that? Clara looked at him. At the pale blue eyes that held no malice, only a tired kind of understanding. No, but it doesn't matter. It's what Thomas wanted. Dixon nodded slowly. He turned to go, then stopped. One more thing. When we reach Dodge, I'm bringing Jesse's daughter. Lily. She's 14. She has a right to see where her father's buried. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. She thought about being 14 and finding out your father hadn't abandoned you, that he was dead, that his body had been hidden for 6 years. Bring her. Clara's voice was gentle. She should be there. Dixon's face softened just a fraction. He touched his hat brim and walked back toward his camp. Pike came over when Dixon was out of earshot. He looked at Clara with those gray stone eyes. How far you figure we can push them today? Clara looked at the herd, at the cattle still waking, at the long empty miles ahead. Far as they'll go, we're burning daylight. Wake Sam. She moved to check the mare's hooves. We leave in 20 minutes. They broke camp in tense silence. Dixon's men integrated into the drive with practiced efficiency. 2 rode flank, 1 took drag, 1 scouted ahead. Dixon rode near Clara at the point. The herd moved north. Pike fell in beside Clara when they were an hour out. That went well. His voice was dry. Clara didn't smile. Dixon knows more than he's saying. Pike was quiet. Then he said, You noticed the way he looked at Sam, Clara had. What about it? He recognized something. Pike's jaw was tight. Dixon's not just here for Jesse. There's something else. Clara felt cold despite the morning sun. What do you think he wants? I don't know. But whatever it is, we'll find out when we reach that grave. They rode in silence after that. The land rolled past, brown grass and scattered mesquite. The sky stretched overhead empty and blue. Hours passed. The herd found its rhythm. The steady drum of hooves on hard ground, the creak of leather, the low occasional calls between riders. It was late afternoon when Pike rode up beside Clara again. This time his face was different, serious in a way that made her stomach tighten. We need to talk. He glanced back to make sure Sam wasn't in earshot. About the boy, Clara kept her eyes forward. What about him? Pike's voice dropped. He's Thomas's son. I know. No. Pike turned to look at her. You don't understand. Sam doesn't just look like Thomas. He is Thomas. Same build, same eyes, same way of sitting a horse. Anyone who knew Thomas will see it the second they look at Sam. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Your point. When we get to Dodge, people will recognize it. They'll know who Sam is, and they'll know you've been lying about it for 6 years. Let them know. Clara's voice was flat. Pike shook his head. You're not hearing me. If word gets out that Thomas had a son, there's going to be questions. About the ranch, about inheritance, about why the boy didn't get what was rightfully his. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. What are you saying? Pike's eyes were steady on hers. I'm saying Thomas might have left something more than a letter for Sam, and when Sam finds out what it is, everything changes. The implications hung between them. Clara thought about the ranch, about the will Thomas had left, about the fact that legally if Sam was Thomas's son he had a claim that superseded hers. Did Thomas tell you this? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Pike looked away. He told me to make sure Sam got what was coming to him. I didn't ask what he meant. Figured it was just the letter. But now I'm not so sure. They rode without speaking. Clara's mind turned over the possibilities. If Sam inherited the ranch, she would have nothing. 6 years of work, 6 years of keeping the place running. All of it would go to a boy who hadn't known his father, who had no connection to the land except blood. The sun dropped toward the horizon. They made camp in a shallow valley with good grass and a creek that still held water. Dixon's men set up separate from the main group, but close enough that the message was clear. They were being watched. Clara waited until full dark, until Sam had rolled into his blanket and Pike was tending the horses. Then she walked out beyond the firelight to the edge of the valley where the land rose up into empty darkness. She stood there looking at nothing, feeling the weight of everything. She thought about Thomas, about the man she had loved, the man who had kept secrets, who had killed his brother to protect a son she didn't know existed, who had died asking Pike to make sure that son got what was coming to him. She thought about Sam, about the boy who looked at her now with eyes full of betrayal and confusion, about how his whole world had shattered in a single morning, about the letter waiting for him in a grave 700 miles away, and she thought about herself, about who she had been before Thomas died, the woman who believed in simple things, love and marriage, and the idea that people were who they said they were. That woman was gone, had died the same night Thomas did. What was left was this, a widow driving cattle north to dig up a body and hand over a ranch to a boy who might hate her by the time they reached Kansas. The wind picked up, cold and steady. It carried the smell of dust and distant rain that would never arrive. Clara heard footsteps behind her, soft on the grass. She didn't turn. Dixon stopped beside her, close enough to talk, far enough to keep it civil. Beautiful night. His voice was quiet. Clara said nothing. They stood in silence for a while. Stars wheeled overhead. The creek whispered in the darkness below. "I lied to you this morning." Dixon's words came out flat, matter of fact. Clara turned her head to look at him. Dixon kept his eyes on the horizon. "I'm not just here to bury Jessie. I'm here because Jessie had a daughter. Lily. She's 14 now. Lives in Dodge with her aunt, my wife." Clara absorbed this. "So you're Jessie's brother-in-law?" Dixon nodded. Jessie was a hard man, mean sometimes, but he loved that girl, and she loved him. When he disappeared 6 years ago, it broke her. She spent her whole life thinking her father abandoned her. And you want to give her closure? I want to give her a grave she can visit. Dixon's voice was tight. Want her to know her father didn't leave. That he died. That someone cared enough to bring him home. Clara understood then. Dixon wasn't a villain. He was a man trying to do right by a child. Trying to give a 14-year-old girl the only gift he had left. The truth about her father. There's more. Dixon pulled something from his coat. A badge, federal marshal. He held it out. The metal caught starlight. "I've been tracking your husband for 6 years, Mrs. Monroe. For murder. My job was to bring Thomas Monroe to justice. But he died before I could. So I've been tracking the body instead. Trying to find Jessie. Trying to close the case." Clara's chest tightened. "You could arrest me. Accessory after the fact. I could." Dixon put the badge away. "But I'm not going to. Why? Because I read the reports. Talked to people who knew both men. Jessie was going to hurt you and Sam. Thomas did what any father would do. Protected his family." Dixon's voice softened. "That's not murder, Mrs. Monroe. That's survival." He turned to face her fully. "When we get to Kansas, we dig up Jessie together. I'll write in my report that Jessie Monroe died in an accident. That Thomas found the body and buried it with the intention of bringing it back when circumstances allowed. That you completed his mission. Case closed. And the badge." "The law," Dixon smiled grimly. "Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. I'm choosing justice." Clara nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Dixon's eyes were serious. "There's something else buried with Jessie. Something Thomas left for Sam. I don't know what it is. But whatever it is, it's going to change everything for that boy. You ready for that, no?" Clara's voice was honest. "But it doesn't matter. It's what Thomas wanted." Dixon studied her. Then he touched his hat brim and walked back toward the camp. Clara stood alone in the darkness. The wind blew, the stars turned. "Boy." And somewhere inside her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 6 years finally started to loosen. The next 3 days passed in a blur of dust and heat and the steady rhythm of cattle moving north. They crossed into Oklahoma territory. The land changed, became redder, rockier. The grass grew taller and the horizon stretched wider, and every mile felt like they were moving further from the world Clara knew and deeper into something vast and unknowable. Sam didn't speak to her. He rode his position on the flank and did his work, and at night he rolled into his blanket on the far side of the fire. Pike tried once to talk to him. Sam turned away. Dixon's men integrated into the routine. They were good hands, professional. They moved cattle like they had been doing it their whole lives. Dixon himself rode point with Clara most days. They didn't talk much. Just the occasional comment about the trail or the weather or the herd. But there was an understanding between them now, a shared purpose. On the 4th day they reached the Red River. It was running high. Recent rains upstream had swollen it past its normal banks. The water was brown and fast and carried whole trees torn loose from the soil. Clara sat her horse on the south bank and looked at the crossing and felt doubt creep in for the first time. "We can't cross this." Sam spoke for the first time in days. His voice was flat. "We'll lose half the herd." Dixon rode up beside them, studied the water. "There's a narrower crossing 2 miles east, rockier bottom. Water's not as deep." "How do you know?" Clara looked at him. "I've crossed here before." Dixon's eyes stayed on the river. 5 years ago. With Jessie. We brought 300 head through, lost 6 steers. That's acceptable." Pike joined them. His face was grim. "Even the narrow crossing is dangerous in high water. We should wait. Let the river drop. We don't have time to wait." Clara's voice was harder than she intended. "We've got 30 days left to reach Dodge. Less if we account for delays. Every day we wait is a day we might not make it." The men looked at her. Even Sam turned his head. "We cross." Clara gathered her reins. "Dixon, you lead. Show us the narrow point. Pike and Sam, you push the herd. I'll ride sweep. Anyone falls in, we pull them out. We don't leave anyone behind." They reached the narrow crossing an hour later. Dixon had been right. The bottom was visible through the brown water. Rocks and gravel instead of mud. The current was still strong, but not the killing force of the main channel. Dixon went first. His horse stepped into the water carefully. Found purchase on the rocks. Moved forward slow and steady. The water rose to the horse's chest, but no higher. Dixon reached the far bank and turned. "Your turn, Mrs. Munro." Clara urged her mare forward. The cold water hit her boots, rose past her stirrups. The current pushed hard against the horse's side. The mare stumbled once, found her footing, kept moving. Clara felt her heart hammering, but kept her hands steady on the reins. The horse climbed the far bank, and Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. They brought the herd across in small groups, 10 head at a time. It took hours. The sun climbed and beat down, and the water stayed cold and relentless. Sam crossed with the third group. Pike brought up the rear. They lost 2 steers. Both young, both panicked and went under before anyone could reach them. Clara watched their bodies wash downstream and felt each loss like a cut, but they made it. All the people, all the horses, 398 head of cattle on the north bank of the Red River. They made camp wet and exhausted. No one spoke. They built the fire and dried their clothes and ate beans straight from the can. Clara sat apart from the others and felt the weight of command. Every decision was hers, every loss her responsibility. She thought about the 2 steers washing downstream, about how Thomas would have made the same call, would have crossed rather than wait. She wondered if that made her like him or if it just made her desperate. That night Sam found the map. Clara had been careless, too tired to check her saddlebag before she slept. She woke to voices. Pike and Sam, low and urgent. She sat up. They were crouched by the fire. Pike had something in his hands, paper, old and worn. Clara's chest went cold. She stood and walked over. Neither of them looked at her. Sam's voice was tight. "Who is this?" Pike's answer was quiet. "Jesse Munro. Your uncle." "Yes. And this." Sam pointed at something on the map. "What does this mean?" Pike read aloud. "Where I buried him. Bring him home." His eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Sam. "Your father wrote this. This is the map Thomas left." Sam's hands were shaking. He pointed at another mark. "And this." "What's this?" Clara moved closer, looked over their shoulders, her breath caught. There in the margin, in faded pencil, 2 words she had seen before but never fully understood. For Sam. And beneath it, "When he's ready." Pike's face had gone pale. He looked at Clara. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head. "I saw it, but I didn't know what it meant." Sam stood. The map crumpled in his fist. His eyes were wild. "He left me something. At the grave. My father left me something, and you were just going to dig it up and hand it to me like it was nothing. It's a letter." Clara's voice was gentle. "I think it's a letter telling you the truth. About who he was, who you are." Sam shook his head. His eyes were wet. "You don't know that. You don't know what's buried there." "You're right." Clara stepped toward him. "I don't. But we're going to find out, together." Sam looked at the map, at the marks his father had made, at the words written in a dead man's hand. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "What if I don't want to know?" "Then you don't have to read it." Pike's voice was steady. "We'll dig it up. You can decide then." Sam nodded slowly. He handed the map to Clara. His fingers brushed hers. Cold, shaking. How much further? His eyes met hers for the first time in days. Clara looked at the map, at the distance between where they stood and the X marked on the Kansas hillside. 10 days. Maybe less if we push. Sam turned away, walked back to his bedroll. Clara watched him go, felt Pike's eyes on her. "He's going to break." Pike's voice was so low only she could hear. "When we get there, when he reads whatever Thomas left, that boy's going to come apart, I know." Clara folded the map, carefully, precisely. "Then we'll help him put himself back together." She walked to her own bedroll, lay down under stars that felt like chips of ice in a black sky. Thought about the letter waiting in a grave she had never seen, about the words Thomas had written to a son he loved but couldn't claim, about whether any truth was worth the price it cost to learn it. The wind blew across the prairie. The cattle breathed in the darkness, and Clara Munro closed her eyes and tried not to dream about the weight of bones and the promises carved into dirt and the moment fast approaching when all the secrets would finally come to light. Tomorrow they would ride deeper into Kansas, closer to the end of the trail, closer to the grave that held answers neither she nor Sam were ready to hear. But tonight they were still moving, still pushing north, still carrying the dead with them into whatever morning came next. Kansas in October looked like the end of the world. The grass had gone the color of old bone bleached by summer sun and autumn wind into something brittle and pale. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the flat, endless land like a lid on a coffin. There were no trees here, no shelter, just rolling prairie that went on forever in every direction, and somewhere in all that emptiness a grave. They had been riding for 9 days since the Red River, 9 days of pushing the herd north through country that got harder and emptier with every mile. The cattle had thinned from the journey, ribs showing through dusty hides, heads hanging low, but they kept moving because Clara kept them moving, and Clara kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. The hillside appeared on the 10th day, A low rise barely visible against the flat horizon marked by a single twisted cedar that had somehow survived the wind and the drought and the lonely decades. Claire saw it from 2 miles away and knew without looking at the map that this was the place. The tree matched the sketch Thomas had drawn. The angle of the slope, the way the land fell away to the east toward a dry creek bed. She reined her horse to a stop. Behind her the herd slowed and bunched, sensing rest. Pike rode up on her left, Sam on her right. Dixon came from the rear with his men trailing. No one spoke. They all looked at the hillside and the tree and knew what it meant. Claire's hands were steady on the reins, but her chest felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around it and was slowly tightening them. 6 years. 6 years since Thomas had stood on the same ground and dug a hole and lowered his brother's body into the earth. 6 years since he had ridden away and 3 days later died with that secret locked in his chest. "We're here," her voice came out flat. Dixon dismounted, walked a few steps toward the hill, stood looking at it with his hat in his hands. "He's really there." It wasn't a question, Clara nodded. "According to the map." Dixon turned. His pale eyes found hers. "I need to go to town. Dodge is 5 miles west. I'll be back before dark. You're bringing her." Sam's voice was quiet. "The girl. Lily." Dixon's jaw tightened. "She has a right to be here. To see where her father's buried." Clara looked at Sam, at the rigid set of his shoulders, the careful blankness of his face. She thought about being 14 and finding out your father hadn't abandoned you, that he was dead, that his body had been hidden in the ground for 6 years while you grew up thinking he didn't love you enough to stay. "Bring her." Claire's voice was gentle. "Sam's right. She should be here." Dixon nodded once, mounted his horse, rode west toward Dodge with 2 of his men trailing. The remaining 2 stayed with the herd. Pike began setting up camp at the base of the hill. Sam helped without being asked. They worked in silence, building the fire, tending the horses, doing the small necessary tasks that kept a body busy and a mind from wandering into dark places. Clara walked up the hillside alone. The grass whispered against her boots, dry and brittle. The wind pushed at her back like a hand urging her forward. She reached the twisted cedar and stopped, put her hand on the rough bark. The tree was old, gnarled. Its roots dug deep into the Kansas soil looking for water that probably hadn't existed in years. But it survived, stubborn, refusing to die. She looked down at the ground. The grass here was no different than anywhere else. No marker, no stone, just earth and wind and the memory of what lay beneath. Thomas had stood here, had looked at this same view, the prairie rolling away forever, the sky pressing down. He had dug the hole himself, no one to help, no one to witness, just a man burying his brother in the middle of nowhere because there was no other choice. Clara wondered what he had thought about while he dug, whether he had cried, whether he had prayed, whether he had felt relief or guilt or just the cold mechanical necessity of doing what had to be done. She sat down with her back against the cedar, pulled the Winchester rifle across her lap. The metal was warm from being slung across her shoulders all day, the wood smooth under her palms. She ran her fingers over the carved initials. T.M. Thomas Monroe, the man who had killed his brother, the man who had loved her, the man who had died asking Pike to make sure Sam got what was coming to him. The afternoon light slanted low across the grass, gold and amber, beautiful in the way dying things are beautiful. Clara sat very still, let the quiet settle over her like dust. She thought about the first time she had seen Thomas. She had been 19, working in her father's store in town. Thomas had come in needing supplies and she had helped him, and he had looked at her with dark, serious eyes and said thank you in a voice that made something in her chest tighten. He had come back the next week, and the week after, always finding some reason to stop by, always staying a little longer than necessary. By the 3rd month he had asked her father for permission to court her, and by the 6th month they were married. She had loved him without question, without doubt, had believed that love was enough, that knowing someone's heart meant knowing them. But Thomas had kept Jesse's secret, had kept Sam's secret, had kept the whole violent, dangerous truth of who he had been locked away where Clara couldn't see it. And she had lived beside him for 12 years never knowing, never suspecting, thinking she was married to a simple rancher when really she was married to a man capable of murder. Except it wasn't murder. Not really. Dixon had been right about that. Thomas had killed Jesse to protect Sam, to protect Clara. He had done what any father would do, what any husband would do. He had chosen his family over his blood, and then he had died for it. Clara's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She was past crying. Had been for 6 years. Now there was just the hard, cold acceptance of what was and what could never be changed. Hooves sounded from below. Clara looked down the slope. Dixon was riding back from Dodge, but he wasn't alone. The girl sat in front of him on the saddle, small and thin with the dark hair pulled back in a braid. She wore a simple dress and a coat too big for her shoulders, and when Dixon helped her down she stood very straight and still like she was afraid that moving might shatter something. Clara walked down the hill. Pike and Sam had seen them too, were standing by the fire watching. The girl looked at all of them. Her eyes were huge in her pale face, the same pale blue as Dixon's, family eyes. Dixon put his hand on the girl's shoulder. This is Lily. His voice was gentle. Lily, this is Mrs. Monroe. She's the one who brought us here. Lily looked at Clara, studied her with the intensity of someone trying to memorize a face. You knew my father. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Clara chose her words carefully. I knew of him. My husband knew him better. Where's your husband? He passed away 6 years ago. The same time Papa disappeared. Lily's eyes were too knowing for 14. Uncle Dixon says Papa didn't leave me. Says he died. That's right. And you know where he's buried. Clara nodded. Lily looked up the hillside. At the twisted cedar, at the ground beneath it. Can I see? Clara glanced at Dixon. He nodded slightly. Come on. Clara held out her hand. Lily hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cold and small. They walked up the hill together. Pike and Sam and Dixon followed at a distance. When they reached the cedar, Clara stopped. Here. Lily looked at the ground. At the unmarked earth. She knelt slowly, put both hands flat on the grass. Papa. Her voice broke on the word. Clara stepped back, gave the girl space to grieve. Sam came to stand beside her. They watched Lily cry silently, shoulders shaking, hands pressed to the ground like she could reach through the dirt and touch what was buried there. We're going to dig him up, Clara said it quietly. Give him a proper burial. So you can visit. So you know where he is. Lily nodded without looking up. Dixon knelt beside his niece, put his arm around her shoulders, spoke in a low voice Clara couldn't hear. After a while, Lily stood, wiped her eyes, looked at Clara with a face older than its years. Thank you for bringing him home. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. She nodded, unable to speak. They dug as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Pike and Dixon did most of the work. Sam helped. Clara stood with Lily at the edge, watching. The girl never looked away, never flinched. Just watched as the shovels bit into the earth and the hole grew deeper. It took an hour. The ground was hard, packed tight by 6 years of weather. But finally Pike's shovel hit something solid. Canvas. He looked up at Clara. Found it. They cleared the dirt carefully, exposed the body wrapped in its shroud the canvas had held, protected what lay beneath from the elements. Dixon and Pike lifted it out together, laid it on the grass. No one spoke. Lily took a step forward, stopped, looked at Dixon. Can I see him? Dixon's face was pained. Lily, it's been 6 years. It won't look like you remember. I need to see. Dixon glanced at Clara. She nodded. He knelt and carefully unwrapped the top portion of the canvas, pulled it back. Jessie Monroe's face was skeletal, skin drawn tight over bone, lips pulled back from teeth, eyes long gone, but Lily didn't scream. Didn't turn away. She just looked at what remained of her father and then nodded once. It's him. Her voice was steady. Thank you for letting me see. Dixon rewrapped the body. As he did, something fell from the canvas. A small metal box. It hit the ground with a dull thunk. Sam bent and picked it up, turned it over in his hands. It was rusted but intact. And on the lid in faded paint were 2 words. For Sam. Everyone went still. Sam's hands started to shake. He looked at Clara, at Pike. Back to the box. Open it. Pike's voice was gentle. Sam's fingers fumbled with the latch. It was stuck, rusted shut. Pike handed him a knife. Sam worked the blade under the lid. Pried. The box opened with a crack. Inside was a letter, folded tight. The paper was yellowed but dry, protected by the metal box from moisture and decay. Sam unfolded it with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the first line. His face went white. Read it, Clara said softly, out loud. Sam's voice shook as he began. Told you. I'm sorry I let you grow up, told you. I'm sorry I let you grow up thinking you were alone. Your mother was a good woman. I loved her. But I was young and stupid, and when she got pregnant, I ran. I didn't find out about you until 2 years later. By then you were living with her sister, and I was married to Clara, and there was no way to claim you without destroying everything. Sam's voice broke. He stopped, looked at Clara. She nodded for him to continue. I tried to be part of your life from a distance, checked on you, made sure you had what you needed. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I should have been there. Should have raised you, should have taught you how to ride and shoot and work the land. All the things a father teaches his son. But I failed you. And I'm sorry. 6 years ago, my brother Jesse found out about you. He threatened to tell everyone, to ruin Claire's reputation, to take you away from the only family you'd ever known. I couldn't let that happen. So I killed him, shot him dead, and buried him here on this hill and rode home knowing I'd just murdered my own blood to protect yours. 3 days later, Jesse's men found me. They knew what I'd done. They made me pay for it. And I died without telling you the truth, without giving you what you deserve. So I'm telling you now, you are Samuel Thomas Monroe. You are my son. You are the only good thing I ever made in this world, and I love you more than I love my own life. Clara Monroe is not your blood mother, but she is your mother in every way that matters. She raised you when I couldn't, loved you when I was too coward to claim you. Don't hate her for keeping this secret. She did it because I asked her to, because I thought it would protect you. I was wrong. You deserve the truth. and now you have it. There's one more thing. By the time you read this letter, Clara will have completed the cattle drive to Kansas. She'll have saved the ranch. She'll have done everything I asked and more. But the ranch isn't hers. It's yours. I changed my will before I died. If Clara brings you to this grave, if she finishes what I started, the ranch goes to you. All of it. The land, the cattle, everything. It's your inheritance. Your birthright. What I should have given you from the beginning. Take it. Build something better than I did. Be a better man than I was. I love you, son. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to say it in person. Your father, Thomas Monroe. Sam finished reading. The paper fluttered in his shaking hands. He looked at Clara, tears streaming down his face. You knew, his voice was raw. You knew the whole time that I was his son, that the ranch should be mine. And you still brought me here, still gave me the letter. Clara nodded. Her own eyes wet. That's what he wanted, what you deserved. Sam took a step toward her, then another. Then he was in her arms, sobbing like the child he had never been allowed to be. Clara held him, let him break, let him pour out 6 years of not knowing and 6 days of anger and the overwhelming grief of learning your father loved you but died before he could say it. Pike looked away. Dixon did too. Lily watched with solemn eyes. When Sam finally pulled back, his face was blotchy and wet but calmer. He looked at the letter still clutched in his hand. I don't want the ranch. Clara blinked. What I don't want it. Sam's voice was firm. You earned it. You kept it running for 6 years. You drove 400 head of cattle across 700 miles to save it. It's yours. Sam, Clara shook her head. Your father wanted you to have it. Then we share it. Sam looked at her with Thomas's eyes. You run it. I work it. Together. The way it should have been from the beginning. Clara felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 6 years finally release. She nodded. Together. They buried Jesse Monroe properly. Dug a new grave at the top of the hill where the view was good and the cedar would mark the spot. Wrapped him in fresh canvas and lowered him down. Turin, Pike, and Dixon filled the hole while Lily stood with her hand in Clara's and said goodbye to the father she had lost twice. Dixon made a wooden cross from branches, carved Jesse's name into it. Jesse Monroe, 1838 to 1876. Father, brother, gone but not forgotten. When it was done, Lily knelt and put her hand on the fresh earth. Goodbye, Papa. I love you. They rode to Dodge City in the fading light. The herd moved slow, tired. But they moved. Clara counted as they went. 398 head. After all the miles in the river and the losses. Enough. The stockyards at Dodge were crowded. Cattle flew from a dozen different drives milling in the pens. The smell of manure and dust and the shouts of cowboys and buyers filled the air. Clara found William Marsh in his office, a small man with spectacles and a ledger. Mrs. Monroe. He stood when she entered. I've been expecting you for 6 years. My husband made arrangements. He did. Marsh opened the ledger. 400 head at $18 each. He looked at her. How many you got? 398. Marsh did the calculation. $7,164. Clara's stomach dropped. The debt was $7,200. She was short by $36. After everything. After 6 years and 700 miles and digging up a body and watching Sam's world break open, she was still going to lose the ranch. Marsh must have seen something in her face. He cleared his throat. Tell you what, I'll round it up. Call it 400 head, 7,200's even. Clara stared at him. What, because Thomas Monroe was a good man, and because you drove those cattle further and harder than most men could have? Marsh's eyes were kind behind his spectacles. You earned the extra $36. Clara nodded, unable to speak. Marsh counted out the money, handed it to her in a bank draft. She held it in her hands. $7,200. Exactly what she needed. But when she walked out of the office, Dixon was waiting. Mrs. Monroe. His voice was formal. I need to speak with you. He led her away from the stockyards, to a quiet spot behind the hotel, pulled something from his coat. A badge, federal marshal. Clara's blood went cold. I've been tracking your husband for 6 years. For the murder of Jesse Monroe. Dixon's voice was level. My job was to bring Thomas to justice. But he died before I could. So I've been tracking you, waiting to see if you'd lead me to the body. You going to arrest me, I could. Accessory after the fact, helped conceal a crime. They stood in silence. Clara thought about the ranch, about Sam, about how close she had come only to lose it all now. But I'm not going to. Dixon pulled out a paper. An arrest warrant for Thomas Monroe. He tore it in half, then in half again. Let the pieces fall. As far as the law is concerned, Jesse Monroe died in an accident. Thomas found the body and buried it with the intention of bringing it home when he could. You finished what he started. Case closed. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Why, because I read the reports. Talked to people who knew both men. Jesse was going to hurt you and Sam. Thomas did what any father would do. Dixon's pale eyes held hers. That's not murder, that's survival, and you don't deserve to hang for it. He turned to go. Stopped. Looked back. Take care of that boy, Mrs. Monroe. He's got his father's eyes. Make sure he doesn't get his father's ghosts." Then he was gone. Walking back toward where Lily waited with the horses, Clara stood holding the bank draft and watching the pieces of the warrant blow away in the Kansas wind. She paid the debt the next day, sent a telegram to Ira Baker with the bank draft, received a reply within the hour. Debt satisfied, ranch clear, Clara Monroe free owner of the Circle M. But the victory felt hollow. She had saved the ranch. But she had also learned it wasn't really hers, that Thomas had left it to Sam, that everything she thought she owned was actually his inheritance. Sam found her sitting on the hotel porch that evening, sat down beside her without asking. What now? His voice was quiet. Now we go home. And then we work. We rebuild. We make something Thomas would be proud of. Sam was quiet. Then he said I meant what I said. About sharing the ranch. About doing it together. I know. Clara looked at him. At Thomas's son. At the boy who had become a man somewhere on the trail between Texas and Kansas. I meant it too. They left Dodge the next morning. Just the two of them and Pike. Dixon and his men stayed behind with Lily. Clara said goodbye to the girl on the hotel steps. Thank you. Lily's voice was soft. For bringing Papa home. Clara touched the girl's cheek. Take care of your uncle. He's a good man. Lily smiled. You too. Take care of Sam. Clara nodded. They rode out as the sun rose, headed south, going home. The journey back took 3 weeks. They moved slower without the herd, stopped when they wanted, took time to rest. Clara noticed the changes in Sam, the way he sat straighter in the saddle, the way his eyes scanned the horizon with new authority. He was growing into himself, into the man his father had wanted him to be. Pike left them at the Red River. Said he had business further west. Clara thanked him. Sam shook his hand. They watched him ride away until he was just a speck against the sky. Then they turned south and rode the last 100 miles alone. The ranch appeared on a cold November afternoon. The same weathered house, the same windmill turning slow in the wind, the same porch where Clara had stood 6 years ago and read the letter that started everything. She dismounted, stood looking at it. Sam came to stand beside her. Feels different. His voice was thoughtful. It is different! Clara started toward the house. We're different. They climbed the porch steps together. Clara stopped at the door, pulled an envelope from her pocket. It had been waiting at the Dodge City post office, from Thomas's lawyer. She had carried it unopened for 3 weeks, not ready to face what it might contain. Now she broke the seal, unfolded the paper inside, read. It was Thomas's will, witnessed and notarized, dated 3 days before he died. The words were simple and clear. If Clara Monroe completes the journey north and brings Jesse Monroe home, the Circle M Ranch passes in full to Samuel Thomas Monroe, my son and heir. Clara read it twice, felt the weight of it settle. Thomas had known, had planned it all. The cattle drive, the letter, the transfer of the ranch. He had orchestrated everything from beyond the grave to give Sam what should have been his from the beginning. She handed the paper to Sam. He read it. His face went very still. He really left it all to me. He really did. Sam folded the paper, handed it back. Then let's get to work. They spent the winter rebuilding, fixing fences, repairing the barn, buying new cattle with what little money remained after the debt. It was hard work, the kind that left you exhausted and satisfied in equal measure. Clara taught Sam the things Thomas had taught her, how to read weather, how to doctor sick calves, how to know when to push and when to wait. Spring came, the grass greened, the herd grew, and slowly, carefully, the ranch came back to life. 1 year after they returned from Kansas, Clara stood on the porch in the early morning light. Sam came out to join her. They looked at the land together, at the cattle grazing in the distance, at the windmill turning steady and sure. Was it worth it, Sam asked. All of it. The drive, the digging, everything we lost along the way. Clara thought about Thomas, about the letter he had left, about Jesse's grave on the Kansas hillside, and Lily's small hand in hers and Dixon tearing up the arrest warrant. She thought about the 2 steers lost in the Red River and the rifle that had carried Thomas's map 700 miles and the secrets that had finally been laid to rest. Yes, her voice was certain. It was worth it. Sam nodded. They stood in comfortable silence, father's son and father's widow. Together on the land Thomas had died protecting. The sun rose higher, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance a cow lowed. The sound carried across the prairie, lonely and certain. Claire thought about a story she might tell someday, about a widow who became a drover, about a boy who found his father in a grave, about the weight of bones and the lightness of truth, about how sometimes the only way forward is through the past. But not today. Today there was work to do, fences to mend. Walk down the porch steps together. The walk down the porch steps together. The boards creaked under their boots, the same boards Thomas had walked. The same boards Clara had stood on 6 years ago when everything changed, but different now, stronger, worn smooth by feet that kept moving forward. Behind them the house stood quiet, waiting. The door open, the windows catching morning light. A place that held ghosts but wasn't haunted. A home built on truth instead of silence. And in the distance 700 miles north, a twisted cedar stood on a Kansas hillside, marking a grave, sheltering the dead, holding the memory of what was buried and what was finally free. The wind blew south, carrying the smell of grass and cattle and the promise of rain. Clara turned her face into it, breathed deep, and for the first time in 6 years felt something like peace. The trail had ended. But the journey would never really be over, because some roads ran deeper than miles, some debts couldn't be measured in dollars, and some promises took a lifetime to keep. But Clara Monroe was keeping hers, one day at a time, one step at a time. Moving forward with the weight of the past and the hope of the future balanced like twin burdens on her shoulders. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.